Good morning, folks. This talk is AppSec Behaviors for DevOps Breeds Security Culture Change. So I know that's a pretty big mouthful, but we're going to unpack what each of these things actually means. My name is Chris Romeo. I am the CEO and co-founder of Security Journey. We are a security culture changing company as well as a security training company. And I'm actually based in Raleigh, North Carolina, but I grew up in Saginaw, Michigan. So I still think of Michigan as my home and love the opportunity to come here and be at Converge. I've been here for the last 3 years in a row. So I spent 20 years in the world of security, doing a number of different fun jobs, from director of incident response at one point to security engineer to government security evaluator. So I've had a lot of different unique experiences. The last 10 years I've been at Cisco prior to starting my own company, and I was part of a central security team focused on secure development lifecycle, or how do you make products secure. So a lot of my examples and things are colored by my experience there. I'm the co-host of the Application Security podcast, so if you ever get a chance to, if you're ever looking for kind of some more content, it's non-commercial type of thing. We actually did an interview yesterday with one of the speakers here, so we just try to talk to interesting AppSec people and bring new perspectives. So this topic of DevOps and security is what I'm going to try to tackle today. I'm going to share my perspective on how I believe DevOps and security should be melded together. I got into DevOps as kind of an interesting perspective. Got asked to speak on a panel a number of years ago at ISC Squared's conference, and I had really not done, and it was one of these panels that had like everything included in it. It was like the IoT of DevOps security in the future. It was like one of those, like every possible topic could have been covered under here. So I wasn't even prepared to talk about DevOps in a lot of depth, and we get there, and the other people, all they want to talk about is DevOps. And so I'm sitting there thinking to myself, I know just enough to be dangerous. So that kind of pushed me into saying, I got to figure out how this thing works. I had a chance in the last year to work with a startup out in San Francisco, about 100 people, and they came to me and said, we're really good at DevOps, we just don't know how to do application security at all. So I was able to go in and work with a company that was so well established in that how do we build software, but needed some security layered on top of it. So I also have my own cloud-based application that we use the DevOps style process to build all of our software. So I actually practice the things that I preach here from my own perspective. So the agenda, what I want to kind of talk about here today first, I want to talk about DevOps and security, kind of provide an overview of what those things mean together, and then introduce what I've seen as the DevOps culture, because we have to understand the DevOps culture to understand how we're going to mix security things into it. And then I've got two different ways using security activities and security behaviors and habits that we can integrate with DevOps and connect security into this kind of development methodology. So DevOps has been popular. It's gotten a lot more popular in the last year or two, but it's really been kind of floating around for the last 5 years or so. And I found these two different articles to be interesting and very telling about the current state of what's happening in the DevOps world. So people that use it, they're admitting, yeah, it's gonna help us grow, it's gonna help us do things faster, build software faster. But 80% of the people that are doing DevOps are saying, yeah, we're struggling with it though. We don't know what all the answers are as to how to make this successful. And the second piece of this is DevOps is largely failing to improve security. That's HPE did a study, talked to a bunch of different companies that were doing DevOps, and figured out that security is really not being impacted in DevOps. When you think about how DevOps works, security should be able to have such an impact there, because the true magic of DevOps is that you're committing small pieces of code and taking it through an automated process to build it and then pushing it out the door. So it's right for security improvements, from a vulnerability management perspective. If we're building our code and pushing it out 20 times a day, 50 times a day, if you have the right tools, we should be able to find vulnerabilities and deal with them kind of in real time in that process. So I got to stop here for a second and say, kind of gauge the room here as far as what is the general knowledge of DevOps here. So if you see this kind of picture here, who, by show of hands, who kind of understand or knows this picture and understands kind of how this process works? Okay. About half the people. So let me just spend a second kind of explaining. So this idea about DevOps is like I said, it's about pushing software out fast. So it's a process, it's a methodology, but it's something that's happening constantly. And DevOps, what they like to call things kind of from a continuous perspective. So if you look at that planning phase there, that's your looking at your user stories, deciding what you're going to do for a particular developer at a particular moment in time. Create is where they're writing their code. Verifying is using your automated tests. Packaging is where the build process puts it into something that can be deployed to a server. Release is when it gets pushed out. There's some configuration that might happen on the server side, and then there's a monitoring process for that application while it's operating. And then you notice we come back around and we go back into the plan phase. So that's the methodology / process that comes in behind this DevOps thing, is that you're going to focus on small changes, and you're going to be constantly going through this process of going around this figure 8, picking up the next piece of work that's going to be done, committing it in very small pieces, and watching it be deployed very, very quickly. So if we're going to turn to the internet for a definition of DevOps, DevOps Borat had just about my favorite tweet I've ever seen on the internet. And that is the definition: to make errors human, to propagate error to all servers in automatic way is DevOps. And so I think that, every bit of comedy has a certain amount of truth in it. So that's why I like this as a kind of working definition. DevOps is automatic. It is easy to push errors and things across all the way, but the benefits truly outweigh that. And the other DevOps Borat tweet there is just, I'm a fan of picking on the whole rockstar idea that you have rockstar developers and rockstar security people. So rockstar programmers are just like you and me, but they also write insecure Ruby code. So that's the kind of making fun of the rockstar kind of world. It's unfortunate DevOps Borat, as of 2014, has gone completely silent. So the world is, not able to take advantage of this humor. So these two memes are the two most popular DevOps memes that have been thrown around for years and years. And once again, there's a small amount of truth in each one of these. So the idea that the one on the left there is probably the most famous one that's been thrown around. And this is the idea that for developers, hey, it worked fine in our systems, and when we wrote it, we tossed it over the wall, and it's your problem now. Whatever we wrote is your problem. And then the other one, I don't always test my code, but when I do it in production. It's kind of making fun of this idea that DevOps is moving so fast that if you can truly see your production as the place where your testing happens and rollback and stuff. So once again, a certain amount of truth exists in every piece of humor. Okay, so back on a more serious note. So to understand how you can influence DevOps with the culture with security, we have to understand, when we talk about a DevOps culture, what does that even mean? And so the first thing about DevOps, I've already alluded to this, is that things are moving quickly. Okay, people are operating at a very fast pace. The second thing I talked about, the small pieces of work. So a small code change. So gone are the days of the waterfall method where developers branched a main line of code and worked on their own little branch for 2, 3, 4 months, and then at some mythical time in the future, all those branches would converge and compile and execute, which we know never actually happened. When you get to that end line, there's always a lot of pain and suffering that goes into the integration. So the idea with DevOps is, let's make small pieces of code changes, push them into the repository. When they're accepted, they're going to be integrated in with all the other pieces. So you're working with updates. Updated code is a lot easier because everything is in smaller chunks. Third thing about DevOps culture, autonomous teams. So there's no silos allowed. So one of the things that DevOps does is, one of the reasons DevOps actually was introduced was that most organizations that were doing development had a development team, they had an ops team, and they didn't talk to each other. And it was this true meme of worked fine in dev, ops problem now. They would write whatever they wanted to and chuck it over the wall and say, this is not my problem. So one of the things that the founders of DevOps said is that we have to build this culture where there is no silos. And then quality is a big thing. If we're gonna move fast, we have to have quality embedded. We can't be putting junky fixes that are untested into our production mainline and having it pushed out. So quality is going to be a huge part of what we're doing in the development process. Number 5 is the feedback, and then what's difficult for us as security people is the eliminate, blame, embrace failure. So DevOps is big about, if we're going to fail, let's fail, but then let's fix whatever the challenges were so that we don't fail again in the future in that same way. But eliminating the blame for security people is a challenge because we've had a 20-year history of blaming whoever is responsible for the particular breach, or and if you don't believe that, just wonder why the average CISO job span is 2.5 years. Why are they there for 2.5 years? Is it because they're getting better offers? Well, maybe not. Maybe it's because something happened and they're the fall person that has to take the blame for that. So DevOps doesn't deal with blame well. It's about how do we get better instead of just pointing the finger at people. And then automation is huge. So if you're going to do things according to number 1, if you're going to move fast, you got to automate. You can't expect manual processes where people are going to do typing and do stuff that's going to take hours, days, months, years. That doesn't work in this. If we're going to push 20 times our code to production per day, there can't be really anything manual in that process, or it's just going to slow us down. So I mentioned that DevOps is big on this continuous idea. And there's 3 main kind of continuous principles that exist in DevOps, and unfortunately there's 2 more that I wish they would have added in when they were thinking about this thing in the beginning. The idea of continuous integration is that's just that idea that we're going to constantly push our code changes into the repository. We're not going to sit on our code changes for a long time and batch up a whole bunch of work. We're going to do a small change and push it in. The other thing that happens in continuous integration is the build system, as soon as you check something in, the build system automatically goes through the build process to see, really, to find out one big thing. Did you break the build? Because if you broke the build, then the lights go off over your cube and you're responsible for being the one that has to actually go back and fix your problem or back your problem out until you can figure out what it was doing that caused the problem. So the idea of continuous delivery is if we're going to do this automation and we're going to push 20 times per day, we need to be able to automate the process of doing the build, testing the build, and then moving the build into a production instance. And so with continuous delivery, this is the idea that the build is automated, the tests are automated, but there is still a human process that sits there where a human being at the end of that series makes a decision, binary 1 or 0, either push the code out or pull it back. And they may run some tests of their own just to confirm that it didn't break the whole thing. Continuous deployment right next to it is the idea where you automate the build, automate the tests, and if everything runs, if the tests don't fail, you push the code to production automatically without stopping. Now, I said there's 2 things on that list that I wish they would have added. Unfortunately, the people that created this, there's no continuous security built into this. And I think that's one of the big injustices of the world of DevOps is if security had been considered right from the beginning, it would have just made things a whole lot easier. But the good thing is the DevOps process is open to accepting change and adding security into it. And so continuous security test would have been a nice kind of feature as well. So DevOps proper, or people that are doing DevOps now that aren't doing security, why is that occurring? Why aren't people just jumping in and doing security into this? So a couple different potential excuses. I mean, one is you can't automate security. Well, I mean, I think you can automate some things in security. You can't necessarily automate everything that a application security professional does, but you can. There's tools, and we're going to talk about how some of those tools can be integrated here. Second thing, true DevOps has no process. And security is a process, so you're trying to inflict a process-based idea on top of something that is just a thing of beauty. I think that's, I think DevOps, there is some process that's happening there behind the scenes. They just don't want to admit it, but there's, they're doing things in a certain order. Security can't move fast. I think security can move fast if done the right way. The people that are pointed to as being the real DevOps leaders, Etsy's a huge one, and they're doing a lot in the application security space. But people usually think about Facebook, Netflix, these type of companies that are scaling out to millions, if not billions, of users and delivering service. And all the conversations that they're having about DevOps don't have any. They're just not talking about what they're doing from a security perspective because their challenges are much more of a scale perspective. They deal with security, they just don't focus on it. And so that's, I think, it drives some of the reason why people don't have an appreciation for it. And then there's their lack of fit. Is security seen as something that's different from Dev and Ops? And there's a third group, security, which is in conflict with the others. One of the other challenges that I've seen is that there's 6 different brands that are being used to describe DevOps and security. And I don't know Julian Vihant, but I love this. I loved his summary here. You'll see people refer to SecDevOps, DevSecOps, SecOps Dev. I mean, they use all these, it doesn't matter. He's saying, just call it DevOps and focus on making security a natural part of it. And so, if you only take away one thing from this whole entire conversation today, that's the most important thing is, DevOps is, you should just focus on making security a part of what's happening there. Don't worry about all the naming constructs and things that are occurring. So, DevOps, and so there's kind of an age-old debate here as to, do you solve this problem with security and DevOps? Is it a people problem or is it a technology problem? And so I'm in the midst of a debate with a friend of mine who has been in the security industry probably longer than I have. And he is violently arguing that DevOps and security is a technology play. So it's not about the people. Now, it just happens that he works for a company that makes a tool that runs into so that kind of, is guiding a little bit of where that discussion was going. And it's a fun discussion because I'm on the complete opposite side of that. I think it's a people problem. I think technology is important, but I think changing DevOps and integrating security is really about reaching the people that are involved in that process. And because of that, application security, this is a people problem. People are the ones who are introducing these vulnerabilities. And so we focus on this idea of security and DevOps. We've got to be about changing the people, influencing kind of what they're doing. So when I think about security culture, one of the things that you'll find if you type in security culture into Google is it's really hard to actually define what culture is. And so I actually found this definition from Tim Ferriss, the guy who wrote the 4-Hour Work Week and all the other, kind of a popular podcaster and blogger and whatnot. And so I added that little with security into it. So his original definition says, culture is what happens when people are left to their own devices. And so I added that with security part in there. And so so security culture to me is what happens with security when people are left to their own devices. So if you have an engineer and nobody's looking over their shoulder and they're faced with a security decision where they're going to have to take a lot more time to fix the problem, or they can just pass that code through and send it off into production. Your security culture is defined by what they do in that moment. Not when you're looking over their shoulder, because if you're from security and they're looking over the shoulder, they're going to be like, I'm going to do the secure thing here. But what happens, and so that's a way you can think about it as far as how do people engage with security in your organization. That kind of defines your culture. And so if we're going to create a security culture, we have to think about what are some different ways that we can do this. And you notice I underline sustainable. Okay, whenever I talk about culture, I'm very careful to say, because it's super easy to change a culture for an hour, for a day, a week. Start talking about a month, a quarter, a year, 5 years. Now we're starting to talk about something that we're going to have to do some deliberate things and some disruptive things to keep that momentum going. We may be able to hyper-focus for a short amount of time, but that kind of it'll dissipate to the point where if we don't continue moving forward and educating people about this problem, over time it'll just kind of blow away in the wind. So that's the idea of deliberate and disruptive. The way I like to think of this is when you're trying to integrate security into anything, if you don't have at least one person screaming at you, you didn't go far enough. Somebody should be like violently opposed and really angry with whatever your idea is that you're trying to do. And that'll tell you that, yeah, you know what, I think we went right about to the right spot. Now, if you got like 500 people yelling in that same way, that might be a bigger problem. But a couple of people being unhappy is okay. So now to this eliminate security blame. I talked about this a little bit earlier, but security people, we like to point the finger at wherever the problem came from. And so what I'm telling you here is that if you want to integrate with folks that are doing DevOps, that are truly living this process, you have to look at the blame game as saying, you know, I'm not going to point the finger, but it's about how do we get better? How do we embrace that failure, transition, and get better from the experience that we had there? Another feature here is building quality and security in together. So I've never understood why we separated quality from security. And I think it's another one of those age-old debates of, is security from a development perspective included within quality? Are they opposing metrics of each other? I think they have to work together very closely. And quality is a huge part of what we do in security from a dev perspective. Security transparency. So this is about being wide open. We can't, and I know there's sometimes situations as security professionals or when we're part of a team in an organization where there's some things that we just, due to liability or legal things, we have to keep a wrap on it. We can't share. But the idea here is if we want to integrate with these DevOps folks, we have to be much more open. We have to engage them and let them know the impacts of if there is a data breach or something against the code that they're responsible for. We got to be a lot more wide open and explain what happened and work with them to embrace that failure and move it forward. And the last piece is we can't silo anymore. If you want to play in this space, you cannot be the security team that shows up and says, I'm here to audit what you're doing. You have to engage and be part of this process. That means you're going to be if they're doing Agile, you're going to be in the daily stand-up meeting. It's 15 minutes. If anything, maybe you're not even there to talk, you're just there to listen and see if there's an issue that comes up. And as you start to be embedded into that culture and be part of that development team, they don't see you as an opponent, they see you as somebody who's here to help and work with us to make this successful. So how do we embed a culture of security? So culture hacking is just this idea where let's be deliberate and try to do some things that are going to change the culture and get things moving in the right direction. So I mean, you can do something as I can consider culture hacking as something as simple as doing recognition. So if you catch somebody that's in the DevOps process that does something really good from a security perspective, recognize them for it. Send an email to their manager. When I was at Cisco, I was one of the biggest spammers inside the company, but it was from a script. It was okay. It was allowed. But I used to, when somebody would achieve something in our training system, security training system, I would send an email to them, CCing their boss, and then I would send a separate email to their boss saying, hey, this person just did something really cool for security. Give them a high five, give them $100, give them whatever you can. But recognition is so huge. And that's part of culture hacking is figure out how do we make some adjustments to the culture to end up with a better result that's sustainable over time. Community's huge. You have to bring the DevOps people into if you have an existing security community, invite them in. And if you don't, create one and allow them to be part of it and allow them to educate you. You can learn a lot by working with developers. I mean, I've learned so many things from the developers that I work with. I'm not a developer by nature, but I certainly have learned a lot about how they think and how they approach things and what really goes through their head when somebody assigns them a bug and it has security ramifications. So being part of that community with them is huge. And then automation, we talked about how DevOps is so dependent on automation, so anything that we're going to do, if you want to change the culture, it's got to be automated to the best degree possible. And so here's the security activities that I see that need to be considered from a DevOps perspective. So the first one, I called it security best practices. In disguise, translate that as security requirements. Okay? DevOps people, for whatever reason, they see requirements, they get all, they think it's some type of coup to make them do waterfall or whatever. So we call it security best practices, and it's a little kind of in disguise there. Threat modeling, we had a couple of different talks about that here at Converge, the idea of how do we find problems in design before we actually start coding things. Static analysis is just tools to run against a code base and determine from an automated perspective based on a rules engine, there's a potential vulnerability at this line in your code base. Security code review is about having somebody that knows a little bit about security look at the code and give you a thumbs up to say, yeah, I think this change you made is not going to put us at some grave danger or open some additional interface that we didn't even consider that somebody could use. Dynamic analysis is just automated tools that can scan things like web apps and go through all the different APIs that they make available and try different attacks against them from a taking in some information about the application. Vulnerability scanning is just tools that, things like Nessus and is there a known vulnerability that's been publicized that exists in a particular piece of code? Third-party software dependency checker. So third-party software is huge in everybody. Everybody that builds something today uses third-party software. The challenge is we're not very good at updating it. So we end up with lots of vulnerabilities in it. And so the idea of a dependency checker is just an automated tool that every time you go to that build, it's going to check a database and say, nope, that library right there has a vulnerability in it. And then it's going to break the build and kick back out and say, I'm not building anymore until you fix it. Red teaming is the idea of bringing the world of penetration testing into the world of the developer and the DevOps people. And then PSERT is just your product security incident response team, or how do you respond here. So if we start to look at these activities and layer them on top of the diagram that I showed you earlier here, you'll see that it kind of makes sense. Requirements or security best practices are something that's happening in the planning phase. Threat modeling and static analysis happens in the create phase. So as somebody's actually writing their code, designing, and then turning it into code, and they're using static analysis tools. And you can automate those static analysis tools as well to really provide somebody with immediate feedback on any of the code changes that they're doing. And then in the verify phase, I've got the code review, we've got the two different types of scanning tools, and then some degree of penetration testing. So this is not going to be a 2-week long. We already talked about this. We got to go fast here. So if we're going to do any penetration testing, it's got to be faster than what we normally think of. And so sometimes it has to happen outside of this cycle as well to be successful. Our dependency checker happens during the package phase. That's something that can easily be automated. And then PSERT is our response. What do we do when somebody tells us, oh, you got a huge problem in this web application? So a customer reports it to you. We got to have a way to deal with that and to kind of bring it all together. So that's kind of the way that I think of layering these security activities on top of the DevOps kind of perspective. And now, so let me transition a little bit. Talked about earlier about how process is something is negative from a DevOps perspective. So what I'm talking about here with this idea of security behaviors is we have to find a way to package up the security activity we want somebody to do into first of all, a lightweight package. So we can't tell somebody that's pushing 20 code, in a DevOps pipeline that's pushing 20 code changes a day. We can't tell them that we have a 4-hour activity that's going to get inserted into each push. Because 4 times 20, that's 8. You just queued up 80 hours so that doesn't work here. So if we have a security behavior that we're going to try to model and work in here, it has to be lightweight, it has to be well defined, clear start and finish point. So we have this bad habit in security of creating these nebulous tasks that nobody ever really knows. When is that finished? So if we're going to do vulnerability scanning or, dynamic analysis of just the part of the code that was changed, we have to focus it in. It has to be easily repeatable as well. So the security behavior is not a process per se. We don't want to model it as a process and make people think that it's a 27-step thing that I have to do. Because what we're really trying to do here with this idea of security behaviors is the security behavior is just a way to teach this idea. The big idea here is we want the security behaviors to influence the mindset and improve the skills that somebody has so that it eventually becomes a security habit. And a security habit just means that somebody does it without thinking about it. They don't have to grab the document that tells them how to do it. They just start to do this activity as a component of what they do. They build dynamic analysis right into their pipeline so that when a code change is made, it kicks off a scan that looks at that component's, code in the staging environment and automatically looks for any new vulnerabilities that were introduced. So this is a mindset change. We're trying to get people to change the way they think. And so I've got like seven different kind of behaviors that I've modeled here. So the first one, build security in. We've been saying this in the world of security for a long time. This is the idea that it's cheaper to do security starting in the beginning of the process versus waiting until some point in the future. And what we want to do here, so this matches up with our security best practices or our requirements in disguise. We want to change the culture and make people think about this. We want them to be thinking about security very early in the process of creating something new. And we can really make this a habit. First of all, we got to explain why. You want to make this a habit. Make sure that all your developers know why they should care about this stuff. Because so many times we hit them with here's the what we want you to do, here's the how, and then we wait till the very end if we ever explain why they should care about this. So work that in a lot earlier in the process. And then understand the negative cases that exist there. So that's the first one's building security, and the second one is uncovering design security problems. So this is the idea of threat modeling. We want that developer when they're making a change to the design of how the web application or whatever is going to work. We want them to be thinking about what are the potential new attacks that could be implemented against this new feature that I'm creating. And this is a great one to think about the behavior transitioning into the habit. Because after a developer, you take them through the process, and it is a process in the beginning. You take them through the steps they do for the threat modeling. And it's always a great experience to watch somebody who the light bulb just kind of goes on over their head. They're just, all of a sudden they get threat modeling. And they don't have to do the process anymore because they start to threat model every time they're drawing on the whiteboard for a new feature. They start to go, oh wait, there's a problem there, and they start to think, oh, we don't have authentication, and we're not. So that's where something like threat modeling becomes a habit, is really the nirvana, I guess, of where we want to get to in this whole thing. Is we want people just to do something like threat modeling by default. Reacting to automated security bugs is our next behavior. So we have 3 different sets of tools that can be automated. And really what we're trying our desired outcome with these 3 is we want the developers to see the results of these tools as a gift and not as a curse. Most of them see the 20,000 items that come back from a scan report as a curse because they have to parse through it and try and figure out what the heck is even important here. And very quickly they throw it away because they say it's just not, I can't read it doesn't help me. A couple of different ways we can do that. I'm becoming a big fan of static analysis that's integrated into the developer's environment where they build code. So a lot of developers use different IDE environments. I mean, some people still use VI or Emacs or whatever, but a lot of people are going into using these different development IDEs. And so if you can take static analysis, that little piece of the little program that's checking for problems in your code, and you can integrate it into the developer's environment, it almost turns security checking of new code to be like a spell checker, right? Could you imagine if we turned off spell checking in our world right now? Like what our documents and emails, like, I wish somebody could turn spell checking off for a day because that'd be hilarious to just see how bad we actually write now. But why not get that same approach to the developer's code that they're writing so it's like a spell checker? And so what we're finding is that the results are much smaller batch size because the IDE checkers are doing it in real time and popping up a message to say, whoa, you sure you want to do that? And then the developer can kind of dig into it and determine if it's truly a problem. The other thing we have to do here is limit false positives. So when people get these types of tools, the first thing they like to do is, let's turn on everything that this thing can do and let it rip, and we'll take our 10,000 page report and we'll have a bonfire behind the building. Because nobody's going to read that 10,000 page report. So what I recommend to people is turn those things down when you first bring them up, pick one thing. Say, okay, our static analysis tools, we're going to look for SQL injection. And that's it. Turn all the other rules off and start there. Get some successes where people are actually seeing the value of the tool, and then slowly start to add in more stuff along the way. So another behavior, detecting flaws in another person's code. This is the idea of security code review. A lot of people do code reviews already. It's a pretty standard practice, but the challenge is security is not really baked into that idea. So this is an education thing. The startup I worked with had a great system where, in GitHub, you can do a like on a particular code commit. If a security kind of focused person hadn't given you the thumbs up on your code commit, the automation system wouldn't push it into production. It would hold that change back and wait for that kind of affirmation from somebody who had done a security, had thought about the security of the code. And so this is a teaching exercise as well. You gotta teach people about what are those common problems and how do you see them. Because the static analysis tools are great, but they're tools. They're not perfect. They're not ever gonna find 100%. The people aren't perfect. They're not gonna find 100% either. But if we put these two together from an automated and a manual perspective, we're going to get somewhere closer to 100% than where we are kind of separately. Working towards originally I said eradication of third-party software vulnerabilities, and I realized that was a really kind of almost an impossible task that I was putting before us. So I put work towards eradication of third-party software vulnerabilities. And this is that idea of using that dependency checker that breaks the build and causes it to not allow code to push to production. The next behavior, be mean to your code. Rugged DevOps folks came up with this. That's another good site to check out on this topic. This is the idea of integrating some amount of penetration testing-like thinking into the developer's mindset where, first of all, they're understanding the code will be attacked and then providing them some amount of time to actually go after and attack their own code. Okay? Are they going to find the same things that the 1 week penetration testing professionals find? No. Are they going to find some of those things? Hopefully. Over time, they'll get better. In the beginning, they'll find almost nothing. And then slowly over time, as they start to learn more about the tools and that you start to train them more about the process of how to do an attack, it just helps the developer to have that perspective overall. And the last one is responding in a timely and organized fashion. So the outcome here is when somebody contacts you and says, your web application has a SQL injection vulnerability. What's going to happen there? Is the developer prepared to deal with that? Or are they like a deer in the headlights, just stuck going, I don't know what we do here. So this is the behavior of teaching and encouraging as to what needs to happen when we have a problem along the way. So from a community perspective, I think there's a lot of advantages to bringing a security behaviors and habits coming together through community. You do this by connecting with people, having security training sessions, conferences if you ever get to the point where you have that type of kind of a perspective. So this is just a summary of those 7 security behaviors, and I think these are truly doable. I don't think you're going to do them all at one time. I think you're going to have to choose the ones that you're going to go after, but I think these are very much possible. And really from the application perspective, it's about picking one of these, starting with it, getting some success, and then over time adding in more of these behaviors till you get to the point where you've got all of these different behaviors integrated into your standard DevOps process. So the key takeaways here, back to Julian Vahent's quote there, just call it DevOps and focus on making security part of it. That's what we got to do. Don't worry about the naming or anything that goes into this. Security behaviors, it's about embedding security without all the overhead that exists in the standard process approach. And then security habits are really our goal here. We want those to become standard operating procedure in the developer's mind where they're just thinking, oh boy, I see a problem right there as I design something new. Security community is a great way to encourage those behaviors. So if you want to learn more about DevOps, I've got 3 different resources here that I highly recommend. First one, the Phoenix Project. It was the original book that defined this DevOps world. It is the best technical book that I've ever read because it's written as a fictional story about this particular organization with real characters and real problems that then they build this idea of DevOps to solve the problems. So really good. DevOps Handbook has a section on security, but that'll give you a lot of feedback about the different things that I talked about here in much greater depth. And then DevOps Sec is it's actually a free book. O'Reilly, I don't know, you just got to search it on Google, but different companies give it away if you give them a fake email address, and then you can download it. And I did some writing on Tech Beacon about this idea of DevOps. So yeah, that's my contact information if I can help you in any other way. We got about 6 minutes to get to the front of the lunch line, so we got time for like 2 questions maybe, and then a quick dash to the lunch line. Anybody have any questions, or how about opinions? Anybody that's doing DevOps and has perspective on AppSec and has seen successes or failures or anything? Anybody got anything like that they'd like to share? You're not on camera, so we can turn the camera towards you if you want to be on camera. Nothing? All right. Well, hey, I'll be around for the next couple hours, so I'd love to chat more if anybody's got questions or anything they want to talk in person. So thank you very much.